I wanted to make this video because I noticed that the people that are the loudest and most noticeable proponents of transgender rights routinely make claims about sex and gender that are contradictory or logically impossible. This is very unfortunate because the well-being of transgender people depends upon an effective dialogue with the rest of society. Sadly, when these contradictions are pointed out, they are either not recognized as such or confused with an attempt to delegitimize trans people in their existence. At times, trans activists have called for the cancellation of people making statements that are considered common knowledge by the broader population. They are falsely perceiving people that aren't yet convinced by their paradoxical claims as enemies to their cause. Ironically, these claims aren't even necessary for an effective argument for trans rights in the first place. But instead, they may even be counterproductive to their cause because of their inherent contradictions and insistence with which they are demanded to be adopted. The claims that I'm referring to are that gender is socially constructed and completely separable from the biological sex. And because society decides what is considered masculine and feminine, society can also change what it means to be a man and a woman. And every individual is free to decide their own gender identity, unconstrained by their biological underpinnings. One obvious question arises: how can something be simultaneously socially constructed and also an inherent part of the individual? Gender is constructed, but an individual seeking gender reassignment surgery is to be unarguably considered a man trapped in a woman's body, or vice versa. If gender comes from a society, how can it at the same time be an inherent property of the individual person? Another paradox is that gender is a social identity that can be determined by an individual solitary self. According to the definition of the American Psychological Association, gender identity is not necessarily visible to others. We have to notice that this is in stark contrast to how any other social identity is formed in other contexts. Social identities are never established by self-assertion alone. They are created and verified through the interaction with others. I can't simply demand to be treated as the boss of my company simply because I don't identify as a low-level employee who routinely arrives late to the office. Just as a side note, this has practical implications as well, because there have been cases where male prisoners have declared to be female for the sole purpose of being housed in female prisons. So this is liable to be exploited. Another odd statement is that because gender is social and sex is biological, they are completely independent of each other. But we have to realize that human experience is never only cultural or only biological. Culture exists on top of our biology, whereby one influences the other and vice versa. The act of playing Mozart on the violin is a historically and culturally constructed process, but it is only made possible by the biology of the opposable thumb. Think about what happens if you violate the social norm at the dinner table. If you notice it, you suddenly start sweating, your heart rate and blood pressure increase. In all human experience, culture and biology are interconnected. And the same is true for the relation between culture and biology with regard to the construction of gender. I believe the reason why trans activists insist upon convincing everyone that gender is purely a social construct is because they fear it will otherwise hinder their political goals. Because they think in saying that there are biological underpinnings to gender, one is saying that trans people are a deviation from the norm and therefore unnatural. Of course, that trans people exist should immediately make clear that it is natural, because anything that occurs in nature is by definition natural. And natural or not, nobody should judge somebody for their gender identity or sexual orientation, because it's nobody's business how people organize their private life as long as it doesn't infringe upon the rights of others. And we should all strive towards creating a society that is more compassionate towards marginalized people. And the way we achieve this is not by demonizing people who don't adhere to the latest dogma, but instead through rational discourse.